Hi everyone, I'm Paulie Velton back with another installment. Today I'm going to be talking about replacing the inner axle seals on this 2004 Subaru Impreza RS with a 2.5 liter engine. It probably applies to multiple other model years as well, so if you don't have that exact car, I'm sure this video will still be helpful for you. And so I'm going to go ahead and remove this axle nut. If you've never removed a CV axle before, you might want to see another video for that as well, but I will have a video on that, but it's really not very difficult. There's a nut that has to be removed, and you saw me using a chisel to knock up the peen that they do to hold the nut down so it doesn't rotate off, and I break it loose with a breaker bar. Some of these tools, like that socket for instance, I think it's a 34 or 36 millimeter. If you don't have that socket, you should be able to borrow that from AutoZone. But now what I'm doing here is removing the pinch bolt. Basically, I got to separate the lower control arm from the steering knuckle. I'm choosing to use the pinch bolt because I know it's new and it's not difficult to get out. I know the ball joint's going to come out real easy. You may need to separate the ball joint from the control arm and try it that way. Just make sure you use a proper tool so you don't damage the boot or the joint. If you can take it out this way, this works just fine. You just want to make sure you don't damage the bolt or break it off, because that would be a nightmare. It's not good at all, so please be careful. So I'm just going to reach in here with a pry bar and separate the control arm now from the steering knuckle. And the reason I'm doing this is to get the axle out. So this will give us the travel that we need so that we can get the axle pulled out. Once it's separated, then we can pull the knuckle forward a little bit and pop the axle out the back. And then to remove the axle, you want to go ahead and drain the differential ahead of time. And there's a large nut underneath the differential that's Torx that you'll need to get to remove it. What I'm doing here is leaning over the passenger side fender with the hood up. So I'm looking straight down, and I'm using a very large pry bar in here, which gives you tons of leverage that you need to get past the snap ring that holds the inboard CV axle joint in place. And then I'm just going to reach in from through the wheel well, grab a hold of the joint, and just pull it right out. Okay, so what you're looking at now is the housing assembly that holds the inner seal, and there's also a bearing and a race in there that's behind it that supports the shaft. Now on a lot of cars right here, this would be fine. This is all the further you need to go. You can reach in there with a tool, pop the seal out. Unfortunately, with this design, the seal has to go in, not out, to be removed, which means the housing that you see there that it's pressed into has to come off the car. And what it does is it screws in on threads and applies a specified amount of preload on the bearing that's behind it, which means its position is very important. So there is a lock tab here that we remove, and then we're going to rotate this housing out of the differential. In order to do that, we're going to mark it ahead of time with some paint. As you can see, I did there. I put a little bit of purple nail polish on it or something that I had to mark it so that I know when I return this housing to its proper location, it'll be exactly where it needs to be. Now what I'm using is just a 3/8 extension bar that I've turned around, and I'm just tapping it out with a hammer. You're going to want to use like a plastic hammer or a rubber mallet or something like that. You can use a metal hammer, but you're going to break off some tabs because of the shock. So if you've got a plastic hammer, it's just going to work really, really well for you, like a dead blow or something like that. Takes the shock away. All right, so you just want to ease this thing through. Now it's kind of stiff. It's a bit difficult to get it out of there. So you just got to be really patient with it. The first 2 revolutions were pretty tough, and then after that it got real loose. Now, here's the thing: when you're doing this, it's very important that you count your revolutions. So you're counting the number of times it turns, because you have to duplicate that on the way in to get the preload right, to make sure you're on the right turn when you stop. So the first couple turns, again, are usually going to be kind of stiff, and after you get past those, it'll become very loose and easy to turn out of there. And what I'm going to do here is this, what you want to do, and that is, once it does become loose, I'm going to reach in and I'm going to start rotating it, but I'm still counting how many rotations I'm making before I can pull it out. I continue to rotate it and sort of stick my finger in that hole and pull back to try and pull that housing out with each rotation, until I finally get to the spot where it's so loose I'm just kind of pulling on it and rotating it. And just at the spot where it pulls out all the way, I'm going to set it back in, and I'm going to create a second mark, a second paint mark that defines the location of the hub assembly where I'm going to reinsert it into the differential housing when I'm done putting the seals on this, okay? And then spin it in the same number of turns, and I know it'll be right that way. So that's what I'm doing. I'm turning it back out of the way, and I'm counting until I get this done. Now, if you lose count, you get yourself into a situation like that, I wouldn't get too worried about it. It's going to be pretty obvious. The housing gets to a point where it just stops turning. You can tell as you're installing it. It gets to a point where it just quits turning. It doesn't want to turn anymore. And at that point, normally what you'll find is you've gone maybe 2 or 3 notches past the mark, and you just need to back it up to line it up to that spot, and then put your lock tab back on. You're good to go. So the way this works is, it's got the inboard seal that you can see there very clearly when my hand's not in the way. And it's also got an outer O-ring seal. And this outer O-ring seal is typically the cause of the leak, not the axle seal. But it doesn't matter. You're going to go ahead and replace them both while you're in there, okay? But this outer O-ring is typically the cause of the leak. So the outer O-ring seals the housing to the differential case, where the axle seal that's in the middle seals the axle to the housing. So here I've gotten it pulled back to the point where I know it's ready to pull out, and I've marked it with some red paint, a different tab and a different location, so I know exactly how to set that back in there, and I know how many turns. Be sure you write down the number of turns so you don't forget when you get done here. It's a good idea to lay some plastic over these exhaust pipes, because that gear oil wants to drop in. If you didn't drain it, you don't want that gear oil going into the heat shields, because then it gets really nasty. Okay, so that's the bearing that's behind it. It's a tapered bearing, so there's a race that resides on the housing assembly. So we take that over to our bench, lay it down, and we're going to go through the process of cleaning this thing up and getting the seals out of it. First, I'm going to pop the race out of it so I can get into it. But this is the outer O-ring seal, and you can see it's kind of coming off in shreds, which tells me that it may have been damaged during installation. It could be that the person who installed it didn't lubricate it ahead of time. So if you have any Vaseline, I keep a little tub of it out in the shop for just that purpose, to lubricate these types of seals before they go in. But you can also use gear oil. You don't have to use Vaseline. But Vaseline is good because it's so sticky. It wants to stay in place, and it dissolves right away as soon as it gets warm. So it's great to use for that. All right, so we got the race out of there, and I'm inspecting the surface to make sure it's okay. We don't have a bearing problem, and it looks okay. So now I'm going to use a large socket, and I'm going to go around the perimeter of the seal from the front and just tap it out. And you can see there it tapped out real nice. And it's, hey guys, it's really important you clean your surfaces real good before you put the new seals in. All right, and I got my seals directly from Subaru. I mean, if you're going to do something that's this in-depth, you might as well make sure you get the right stuff. So just get it right from the dealer, and it wasn't expensive at all. And I have what looks like a very thick body washer. It's used for holding harnesses in race cars. So it's just a very thick washer. And I'm using, you can't see, but I've got a socket on the end of an extension, and I'm using a dead blow hammer to pound it in. So this, what's happening here is that washer is pressing, it's surfaced, it's up against the outer perimeter of the seal. That's the metal part. Make sure whatever it is that you use to tap in your seal, that it's putting that kind of uniform pressure on it like that, and it's not putting any pressure on the inner portion of the seal. That would cause immediate damage. Okay, you cannot tap in a seal that way. You have to tap it in by putting pressure on the perimeter of the seal, the metal part. When you have it tapped in all the way, you'll know, because you can then look from the front here and see that it's all the way up against the housing. There's no gaps. So here's the two part numbers that I used from Subaru. And I think they did have to order one of these. They might have been out of stock, or I don't know if they don't stock them, I don't know. But I think they had the inner seal, but the outer they had to order for me or something. All right, so you've cleaned it out real good. An old toothbrush or even a new toothbrush works really good just to clean the grooves out. So we got that on there. And we're all cleaned up. So go ahead and put a little bit of lubrication on it, and then you can set it in. Remember, you're going to set it in. I'm getting ready to tap the race back in. This race it's not a press fit, so it will fall out of there very easily. However, it doesn't want to just be placed back in. So it's a close fit, but it's not a press. So when I put this back in there, if you're faced with this, what I like to use is just a plastic hammer to tap it, and a Phillips head screwdriver, because it's round and it won't damage the race. The race is much harder. It's a very, very hard material, so I'm just tapping it in. Okay, so then what I did was I came over here after I lubricated the seal, both seals, and then I inserted the housing assembly into the differential at the red mark, where I had red marks lined up, and then I spun it in. I can't remember how many turns it was. It's like, 6, 7, 8 turns until I had it where it needed to be. If you lose track of your turns, just go ahead and spin it in as far as you can. You'll notice it starts to slow way down and get very difficult to spin, and then you know you're really there. Then look at your marks. Chances are you'll have to back up a little bit, and then you can put your key in. Make sure you put your fluid back in. Put your fresh fluid back in, and tighten down your bolt, and then you'll be all set. And it's just a matter of reinstalling everything that you took out. As for the axle, to get the axle in there, it does have to go past a snap ring. That's there's like a clip that's in there. So in order to do that, you do have to kind of slam it like that. And it's much easier to get it to fall in when you straighten the axle. You can see I kind of straightened it there, and then it dropped right in. Here from up above, you can see there's no shiny mark exposed at the base of the CV axle there. So it's all the way in. And then you set it into your, you get it started into your steering knuckle, and then set the ball joint into the knuckle, put your pinch bolt in, and then put your axle nut on here, drop it down, torque it down. And again, remember, you have to put your gear oil in. So if you haven't done that, that needs to get done. And that's really it. That's all there is to it. I hope this video was helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave me something on my channel. Otherwise, we'll see you next time, and good luck.